Hey everyone, welcome to Pagan Happy Hour. We are celebrating Beltane today. Thank you all for choosing to join me. This is going to be so fun. We have a lot to cover. We are going to be discussing Beltane, what it is, what the history behind Beltane is, and then I'm going to be sharing with you 7 different historically accurate ways that you can celebrate Beltane. And then we're going to dive a bit into the concept of the May Queen and the mysteries around that. So it should be a really fun show today. And thank you all for choosing to join me. It is Friday at 5 here with my drink, with my flower crown, and I'm ready to chat all about Beltane. And also, it's Pergas knocked. If you didn't join us last Pagan Happy Hour, we dug into the history of Pergas knocked. But today we are going to primarily be talking about Beltane. So if you are new here, here is how Pagan Happy Hour works. This is meant to be a two-way conversation. So I'm going to be looking over here at your comments as they come in. So if you have any questions or things you'd like to share about the topic, feel free to type it out and I will hopefully be able to bring it into the conversation. And there are 2 ways to support the show if you are interested. I do have a Pagan Discord community that I run and moderate. It is connected to my Patreon, so if you enjoy Pagan Happy Hour, if you enjoy my YouTube channel, you can support it for $5 a month and you gain access to the very active Pagan Discord community. And the other way you can support the show is by using Super Chats, which is just that $ below at the bottom of the chat page here. And that allows you to make a question or a comment that's going to pop up real big on my screen. So I'll be sure to see it. And that way I'll be able to make sure I answer your question or address your comment. So now that we got that out of the way, let me cue some drink music. And why don't you tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you're drinking today? So I got some music going this time because it's a Beltane party, right? And if you're anything like me, I don't have any fellow pagan friends. So I'm celebrating here just with you guys. So let me check your comments here while I have a sip of my beverage. So I see people chiming in from all over the place. We have Brazil, Idaho, Florida, DC, Philly, Canada, Albuquerque, Wales, Ohio, France, Massachusetts. Oh my goodness, we are everywhere. And that is so exciting that paganism is just blossoming. And it seems to become even bigger of a movement every single year. Today I am having a IPA. I thought about making a fancy girly cocktail, but I was just feeling an IPA. In case you're curious, I spent 6 years in Chicago, and Lagunitas is a wonderful brewery there. And I very much enjoyed the breweries and everything like that back when I lived in Chicago before I moved to Texas. So having an IPA today and excited to share with you all about Beltane. Okay, let's dive into it. So, Beltane. Beltane is a Gaelic May Day festival. So May Day is just around the corner. It's tomorrow, the 1st of May. And growing up as an American, I was aware of May Day, but I didn't know about the ancient pagan origins until I studied them much later. Casually, you'll see people who are not pagan celebrating May Day, usually with a maypole and a dance around the maypole. It's not common everywhere, but you definitely still see it in some areas here in America. But the holiday of May Day goes way back, and it is called Beltane. I tend to pronounce it Beltane because I am a horrible American who can't pronounce anything wrong, and that tends to be the way that we say it here in the States. So even though I know it's pronounced closer to Beltane, is that right? I'm just going to say Beltane, and I'm sorry about that. Please forgive me. So Beltane was traditionally celebrated in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, I believe, to a certain extent, and the Isle of Man, which is a tiny island that I think is in between Ireland and Britain. And it's also one of the 4 traditional Gaelic seasonal festivals. So you have Beltane as one of them, but then you also have, let's see, Lunaside, Imbolc, and Samhain. So if you are maybe Wiccan and you're familiar with the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, that has 8 holidays. And those 8 holidays consist of the solstices and the equinoxes. And that is taken more from the English magical tradition, coming mostly from the ideas of like the stone circles and Stonehenge, where they honored the solstices and the equinoxes. But then they add on the Gaelic 4 traditional holidays of Beltane, Lunaside, Imbolc, and Samhain. And that's kind of how the Wiccan Wheel of the Year is made up. Of course, you know, not all Wiccans celebrate Beltane, and definitely a lot of people who celebrate Beltane are not Wiccan. But when we're talking about Beltane, we are talking about a more Gaelic pagan tradition. So let me see here, just checking your comments here before we move into the next thing. Okay. Let's see, I see a few of you guys commenting about how May Day is celebrated where you live. I see Chad mentions in Florida they had a maypole that they danced around at school. Graves is saying they used to do Beltane in the park in Central Park in New York City. That's awesome. And then Sarah is saying that in her hometown they have like a Southern Ball type dance called the Mayfete. And the senior girls dance around the maypole. Yeah, it's so funny, at least thinking about the maypole itself and that specific tradition. That doesn't necessarily have pagan origins, the dancing around the maypole, but it is a very kind of phallic thing to be doing. To be decorating these young girls dancing and decorating the pole. So I find it always so amusing when people don't recognize the fact that it's basically a fertility dance, but it's very fun. So where does Beltane come from, right? So the first mentions of Beltane come from early medieval texts. Now, we don't have that much information about Beltane, unfortunately. Pretty much all aspects of Celtic paganism, we don't really have many primary sources to rely on. And what we do have was usually either written by the Romans who were conquering the Celts and the Gaels, or it's written later by monks, which is how it is in this case when we're talking about Beltane specifically. So there are 2 medieval texts that state on May 1st, the Druids would make 2 large sacred fires, and then in the community, they would drive the cattle and the other farm animals in between the 2 great bonfires. And it was believed that these fires themselves were sacred, or that maybe the Druids had maybe cast spells or some type of enchantment upon them, so that when the animals walked through, they would be granted protection for the following year. So it's really a festival ultimately about protecting the animals of the community, specifically the farm animals or your food source. Now, this is something I talked a lot more in detail in my video I did a couple weeks ago, where I talk about the Beltane Bannock. and some traditional Beltane festivities. I talk about how Beltane was originally a festival for the herders. Thinking about it as a time to invest in the protection of your food source. So quite a bit different than maybe your initial conception of what Beltane is, though there are some other elements, of course, that we're going to be talking about, but the main function of an ancient Celtic Beltane celebration was really about maintaining the health and stability of the herds that fed the community. So yeah, kind of an interesting origin there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let's see. Just checking your comments now. Yeah, it is quite odd, the whole kind of herding aspect to Beltane. We really don't associate this holiday with that. But if you put yourself in the mindset of the ancient Celts and celebrating these festivities at certain points in the year, they would of course been connected to the agriculture that was happening at the time, because life was difficult and your food source was something that needed to be protected at all costs. And you'll see that in many different Beltane folklore is associated with trying to do that very thing. So there are lots of different ways that you yourself can celebrate Beltane, even if you don't have farm animals, because let's be real, like I live in a city apartment. I don't have any farm animals. Someday I'd love to have a homestead maybe, but for now, I don't have anything like that. So I did want to share a few ways that you could celebrate Beltane that is still historically accurate from the sources we do know about this pagan holiday, but also a bit more doable, because I doubt many of you have cattle. If you do, then yes, please create 2 bonfires and drive your cattle through them and then tell us all how it goes. That sounds amazing. But for the rest of us, we need to come up with something else to do. So let's see. Checking your comments here. I see someone mentioning Slavic pagan communities and that they would also pass animals through the fire and then couples would jump over it holding hands. And that if they jumped over holding hands, their relationship would last. Yeah, there are a lot of aspects of this Beltane bonfire that is not just associated with the herd animals, but also the fertility of people, right? Because part of protecting the herd is also ensuring that they remain fertile. So fertility is a key aspect of Beltane, both among the animals that sustain us, but also the plants, the wildlife, and of course us humans. That's where you get all of this human-centered fertility symbolism that appears later on, like the maypole dance. So different ways that you can celebrate Beltane. Now, the first one, if you're able to, is to have a bonfire. That is clearly, in my view, the best thing you could possibly do to celebrate Beltane in a historical context. Bonfires are essential to not just Beltane, but all of the Gaelic pagan festivals. If we look at the other side of the Wheel of the Year, we're looking at Samhain, which is another important Beltane festival. Beltane and Samhain are very much connected because in the Gaelic perception of the Wheel of the Year, it wasn't so much 4 seasons, it was 2 seasons, summer and winter. And Beltane marked the beginning of the summer half of the year, and Samhain marked the beginning of the winter half of the year. They're also connected in the aspect of the Fae, which we'll get to in a bit. But Beltane and Samhain both have this interesting bonfire connection, but pretty much all the pagan holidays could be celebrated with a bonfire. And if you did that, that would probably be pretty historically accurate. Let's see, I see a comment here that before clubs, people went to bonfires. So true. And bonfires are so fun. Like, I loved going to bonfires when I was growing up in a rural area, and I wish I had some friends with some space and I could do an actual like bonfire party. That sounds really wonderful. Let's see. And of course, if you are in the Southern Hemisphere, I see someone commenting here from Brazil. So if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you tend to flip the Wheel of the Year. So instead of celebrating Beltane, you're celebrating Samhain at this time of year. But actually, as I was just saying, there's a lot of similarities there between Beltane and Samhain, especially in the concept of the bonfire, as well as this being a time when the veil between the two worlds is at its thinnest and that the Fae can cross over. Let me check your comments again here before we move on. Rachel has a great question. She asks, I was wondering about the connection between Walpurgisnacht with Beltane. So they are kind of linked together. Now, Walpurgisnacht is a more German and Central European pagan holiday, whereas Beltane is a more Gaelic holiday. So we're talking Ireland and Britain primarily for Beltane versus Walpurgisnacht, which is more Germany and the Czech Republic and even some areas of the Slavic and the Scandinavian world. So they are a bit different regionally, but they are similar in certain aspects. I think it is interesting that they were occurring at the same time. Of course, Pergas is originally a Christian holiday honor Saint Walpurgis that eventually became a holiday associated with witches called the Night of the Witches. In learning more about Walpurgisnacht, which is tonight. This is Walpurgisnacht right now. I recommend checking out my Pagan Happy Hour from last week, where we dug deep into Walpurgisnacht, but great question. Let's see. Okay, great questions. So another thing you can do that is a bit easier for us apartment dwellers, perhaps for Beltane, is to decorate the doors and the windows with yellow flowers. So doors and windows are considered thresholds. And the threshold is always very important, especially in a witchcraft context. Now, traditionally for Beltane, they would use yellow flowers to decorate these spaces. Things like primrose and rowan and hawthorn. But if those don't grow where you live, that's fine. You can take any yellow flower and use it to decorate the threshold. And why yellow? We don't really know for sure, but it's likely yellow was chosen because it mimicked the color of the fire. So it's kind of a form of sympathetic magic. Sympathetic magic is where you're kind of taking two different things, but they might look similar. They might have similar functions and purposes. So if you can't have a bonfire because you live in a city apartment, you can kind of honor the bonfire concept by gathering some yellow flowers and placing them in the thresholds of your apartment or home. Now, people did kind of expand this and modify this in different areas. For example, in Ireland, not only would they decorate with yellow flowers, they would also have what was called a May bush. So they would take a bush and then decorate it with different flowers and yellow ribbons and even seashells. So kind of spending the time to decorate your space with flowers and greenery, but also to decorate the greenery you currently have in your home. So that's an easy way that you can celebrate that is in fact still historically accurate to how the ancient Celts would have celebrated Beltane. I see a comment here from Chad saying sympathetic magic, basically like attracts like. Exactly. You put it into better words than I could. So, when you're thinking about yellow flowers, the yellow is attracting the concept of the Beltane fire because it's the same color. Yeah. Sympathetic magic is something super fascinating. Maybe I need to do a whole pagan happy hour down the road about that topic. That could be fun. Let's see. Okay, so another historical thing that people did apparently, of course, again, keep in mind that what we do know about Beltane is being filtered down through the lens of Christian monks who wrote about it. So everything is a bit biased. But another thing that is historically accurate is to collect Beltane dew in the morning. So this obviously isn't going to work everywhere, and it's a lot easier said than done, trust me. But waking up early on Beltane and going to the grasses and the plant life where you live with a little saucer and trying to just kind of collect those little dew droplets. And then you can either place them on your altar as an offering, or you can drink them, because it was believed that Beltane dew was able to provide youth and beauty. There is a lot of Beltane that is associated with fertility, as we talked about, and especially with women and kind of glamour magic, trying to maintain their youth and beauty. And this is one of those things. So if you're up for it, waking up early tomorrow morning, gathering a few drops of that Beltane dew and maybe putting it into your morning tea and drinking it. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a year of no increased wrinkles or anything like that. You'll be able to maintain that youthful composure. So let's see. Laura has a great question here in the comments. Asking, do people wash their face with Beltane dew as well? That is a wonderful idea. Very glamour magic. And you probably won't be able to collect enough Beltane dew to just use it, but incorporating it into a bowl of water that you then use to wash your face is a great way to kind of incorporate this tradition. So another kind of water-focused way to celebrate Beltane is by visiting a well. So wells and water sources in general were vitally important in Celtic paganism. Now, people would traditionally visit a well during Beltane and walk, I believe it was like sunwise, so moving east to west, just like the sun does. And also leave an offering, typically a coin, either in the well or on the edge of the well. And like the Beltane dew, this was thought to kind of increase youth and vitality. So wells are really interesting, and there are many sacred wells in Ireland and Britain. Wells specifically were tied a lot to Imbolc, which is another one of the traditional Gaelic festivals, and we did do a Imbolc party pagan happy hour edition if you're interested in learning more about Imbolc and the Celtic fire goddess Bridget that particular holiday celebrates. And again, there's a connection with wells there. Now, not everyone has access to a well or knows of many sacred wells, so this particular tradition might not work for everyone. But if you happen to have a well on your property, then this would be a great thing to do, to walk sunwise from east to west around the well, to leave a coin as an offering, and to ask the gods and the spirits to maintain your youth and energy and vitality for the next year. So yeah, that's another little thing you can do. Again, it's not going to work for everyone, but if you have a well or know a friend that has a well, this could be a fun thing to try for Beltane. Let me check your comments here, and then we'll move on to the next one. I think we're hitting 7 different ways total, so we're about halfway through at this point. Okay, so the next thing you can do for Beltane that is pretty easy for most people to do is to have a Beltane feast. Now, I am a big cook and baker. I love cooking. I love baking. In my previous video I did a couple weeks ago where I showed the Beltane bannock. You saw that, I like to play around with ancient historical recipes and try and adapt them and create them. But having a feast is a very historically accurate way to celebrate Beltane, not just the traditional 4 Gaelic festivals, but pretty much any pagan festival was accompanied with a feast. And putting yourself in the perspective of the ancient Celt here, thinking about, well, you're limited to what is currently in season. So obviously we don't all live in Ireland and Britain. So what is currently in season where you live? Because in my view, paganism is in part about connecting with the natural world where you currently live. So trying to maybe look that up ahead of time to make sure if you're going to the grocery store tomorrow morning, you're picking out fruits and vegetables and anything else that is maybe hopefully local to your region and is seasonal. That is a great way to celebrate this particular holiday. And again, that interesting connection between Beltane and Samhain. Samhain is also a holiday where it's known for its feasting. I have talked quite a bit about Samhain over the years, so you can learn more about the feasts and festivals associated with Samhain on my channel if you're interested. But with Beltane, I think the primary thing is to just try to incorporate seasonal and local foods for your Beltane feast. Though if you want to get even more historical with it and get a bit nerdy, you can make some recipes that are a bit more traditional to the area and the Beltane celebration. There are 2 things there that I recommend you try. One is caudle. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which is a drink that I've tried it before, and honestly, it is not appetizing. So keep that in mind. But it is traditional. It's a hot drink made of butter, milk, oatmeal, and eggs. You might need to put a little bourbon in there because I'm telling you, when I tried it, it was not tasty. Maybe I need to do a rework recipe to kind of figure out the best way to make it more palatable. But the other thing you can make is the Beltane bannock. And in my video I did a couple weeks ago, I shared the reworked recipe for the Beltane bannock, and that is actually pretty tasty. It's basically an oat cake. Very practical, very connected to especially Scotland and that particular time and what was available to the people. If you're wanting to do something a bit more elaborate than just bannock and caudle, traditionally people would eat lamb for Beltane. So maybe it's a good night to have some lamb. If you're a vegetarian, of course, you wouldn't do that. You would just eat seasonal, produce and things like that. But there's lots of options here. And, paganism is really a spectrum. You can decide how much historically accurate you want to go with your particular festivities. So it's about you and what you're passionate about incorporating. So let me check your comments here before moving on to the next thing. So let's see. Okay. Awesome. So I mentioned the Beltane bannock. That's another thing you can make. So a little bit more about the bannock. Traditionally, a little bit was given to the spirits, and you can do that if you are planning on making it. So like we said back at the beginning with the aspect of the bonfire being for the herd, right? People would toss a little bit of the Beltane bannock into the fire. Now, this was an offering to protect both the animals that were part of their food system, but also as an offering to the animals that were the predators for their food system. So if you research folklore about Beltane, you'll find that people would offer the Beltane bannock to the foxes to prevent them from eating their chickens, or to the hawks from preventing them eating their chickens and things like that, or the predator animals or the wolf. So it was a way to give an offering to the spirits of the animals in the area. So that's definitely something you can do. You can, of course, offer it to the gods or, the land spirits as well. And also that brings me to the offering to the Fae. The Fae or the She, there's different terminology, or even Tuatha. I'm not going to dive deep into Irish paganism or Celtic pagan deities today, because that is a complex topic and I do not have a master's or a PhD in this topic. So I'm just giving you a surface level here. But the Fae aren't quite like our Tinkerbell versions that we're accustomed to. They are often a bit more, not necessarily malevolent, but very neutral entities. And traditionally, people would leave offerings to the Fae to get them to leave them alone. You don't necessarily want to interact with the Fae. That could end pretty badly for you. So often people would leave offerings, usually maybe if you make that cuddle, pouring that into the ground, or just milk. Milk is another common historical offering for the Fae. You can put that outside your doorstep, or even in certain places that are associated with the Fae, such as if you find a fairy circle near you, which is usually a ring of mushrooms, for example, pouring some milk or libation, some type of offering, giving that to the Fae makes a lot of sense, especially now at Beltane, because this is the time when the veil between the two worlds is at its thinnest, just like in Samhain. So we need to appease the Fae, so they don't come after us. So that is another easy thing you can do for Beltane that does have some basis in history. So just to recap here, we went over a bunch of different ways to celebrate Beltane that are historical. So we had the build a bonfire concept, decorating doors and windows with yellow flowers, collecting Beltane dew, visiting a well, having a feast, making a Beltane bannock or the caudle, and then giving an offering to the Fae. So that's not everything. There are, of course, many different ways to celebrate Beltane, and you should do what you feel can connect you to this particular time and holiday. But I am a history nerd, so I would like to do the little research and share some of those historical aspects and folklore traditions that are associated with this time of year. So next, we're going to dive into the May Queen tradition and where that comes from. But before we do, let me check your comments here, and then we'll move on to that. I see Mike here has a great comment and question. He says, tried your bannock this morning and made an offering as well. This is my first official pagan holiday, noticing that alcohol is prevalent in many pagan festivities, anything for us recovery type folks. Yes, of course, you don't have to give alcohol or drink alcohol for pagan festivities. Milk and honey are two traditional things to offer or to imbibe yourself this time of year. Also for offerings, incense is traditional, or even just lighting a candle. Fire, incense, milk, and honey are great things when you're thinking about providing an offering. And of course, the main thing when it comes to the Beltane feast is about connecting with the seasonality of where you live. So just, eating the fruits and vegetables or meat if you're not a vegetarian where you live, that is more than enough to properly connect with this pagan holiday. So great question. Let's see. Great comments here. Let's see. Just checking your thoughts, as I'm still drinking. Awesome. So, it's all about doing what you can with what you have. I do not have a aesthetic pagan apartment. I wish I did, but I'm just, a person here in, my little Dallas apartment. So I work with what I have. I can't really do a bonfire or visit a well. And, if you can't do those things too, that's totally fine. We can be pagan and work with what we have, because after all, that's what the ancient pagans were doing. They worked with what they had, and they honored and respected what they had. So please, by all means, feel free to make exceptions and, substitutions based on what you can do. I really don't want paganism to be something that becomes exclusive or status driven or exclusionary, because the word pagan itself basically meant country bumpkin. So these weren't necessarily the people that had a lot of money. So please, by all means, feel free to do a Beltane celebration that you can do with confidence and not worry about what other people are doing, or even if it's necessarily historically accurate. That's just kind of what I'm into, but you don't have to necessarily celebrate Beltane in a way that connects with the ancient Celts. The important thing is that you are connecting with the land and the spirits and the gods, and whatever, help do that, then you should do that. So next, let's dive into the May Queen tradition. So this is something I just wanted to do a bit of research on, because I find it kind of weird and interesting. And I don't know if you've, but things like Midsummer and Wicker May feature May Queen. So I'm like, where is that coming from? Because it's not anything that's necessarily connected to the Celts. So I did a little bit of research, and firstly, we have a person by the name of Jacob Grimm, as in the Grimm brothers fame, writing May Queen tradition. So this might be the earliest reference to the May Queen tradition in writing, though it was probably occurring before. But he wrote that in the French province of Ain, so it's spelled Ain. If there are any French people here, let me know if this is still going on. But he said that there was a custom where a village girl was selected to play the role of the May Queen, or also known as the May Bride. And then she was adorned with ribbons and flowers, and then kind of escorted through the streets. And this apparently took off. I mean, there are a lot of places that now have the May Queen tradition, where a young girl is picked to be the Queen of May, usually in flower crown, and then is paraded through the streets. The most famous of which nowadays is probably the Beltane celebration that occurs in Edinburgh, where you have this kind of elaborate play production going on between the May Queen and the Green Man, and their wedding ceremony. So this has definitely evolved and changed a lot through time, but it is kind of eternal in a way. My first instance of the May Queen and seeing this kind of archetype or this manifestation was from the Mists of Avalon made for TV movie. Those of you who know, remember that Beltane scene. That was a sexy scene until it wasn't when you learned the later details of it. You'll know what I mean if you've seen it. But yeah, I have always wanted to attend the festival in Edinburgh, and I hope to do so someday soon. But that's the first reference to it. Now, there have been many pop culture references to the idea of the May Queen later on. Obviously, The Wicker Man is the most famous. I highly recommend watching the 1970s movie, not the one with Nick Cage. There's a lot of interesting pagan folklore and references that you will get that other people won't. So that was so fun watching that movie. I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, I know where that's coming from. I know where that's coming from. I know where they're doing that. I'm a big fan of folk horror, even though it might put pagans in a bad name. I find it fun. And of course, the other big one that came out several years ago was A Midsummer. I did a whole video review right after it came out on YouTube channel if you want to see it, but it's a horror movie. Now, interestingly, that movie takes place not for Beltane, but for the summer, which is more important in Scandinavia. But it's still kind of the same May Queen idea, where she's dressed all in flowers and is chosen to, represent this kind of aspect of young fertility and youth. So, this has really evolved over time. And then also it was incorporated within Christianity too, because May is considered the month of the Virgin Mary. And you'll even find people putting flower crowns on statues of the Virgin Mary at this time of year during the month of May. So you kind of see this crossover between paganism and Christianity, which you do in countless pagan festivals. I feel like I've said this ad nauseum at this point. You can watch any of my other pagan festival videos where I talk about the crossover between Christianity and paganism, because it's so intermixed at this point. It's insane. But they had this whole kind of crowning of Mary procession, very much tied to the idea of the May Queen. And then also much later, we have the Wiccan concept of the May Queen. Now, Wicca is predominantly inspired by Celtic paganism and English paganism, along with even some Stone Age stuff like from Stonehenge and the sacred circles. So it's got a number of influences, including other Western occult traditions like the Golden Dawn. I've talked about Gerald Gardner, the founder of Wicca, especially check out my What is Wicca video if you're interested in learning more about that. But that is a neo-pagan religion that was created starting around the 1940s, that was inspired by earlier British forms and Irish forms of paganism. Now, they kind of have their own version of this concept of the May Queen that is very similar to the Oak King, Holly King concept, which I have a video explaining the Oak King and the Holly King. And these are all kind of metaphors for better understanding the wheel of the year. So with the Oak King and the Holly King, you can think of them as two strong men, and they rise and they wane in strength as the year progresses. So the Holly King obviously being at his strength in winter, and then the Oak King being at his strength in summer. Now, same thing here. It's a little bit lesser known, but you now have the May Queen and then the Winter Queen. So the May Queen being this kind of maiden and mother aspect of the triple goddess, and then the Winter Queen being the crone aspect of the goddess. So you can see kind of how she moves and transitions through time. It's less like a battle, I would say, because the Oak King and the Holly King is very much anthropomorphized as like a battle. Whereas with the May Queen and the Winter Queen, or the crone, it's just kind of a natural transition between the three stages of the triple goddess. So, there are so many variations of the May Queen. Where this tradition exactly comes from, we don't know. I mean, we know the Brothers Grimm wrote about it. and that it was most likely celebrated not just in that French province, but also in the rural communities of England and possibly Ireland. I wasn't able to find that out for sure. But it evolved over time, and it's had several iterations and manifestations over the years. So does it necessarily connect back to the ancient Gaelic version of Beltane? Probably not, but it is a part of the folklore of those areas. And as pagans, we often don't just work with the archaeology and the literature. Often we're working with the folklore traditions too, because a lot of things in that area were kind of through the oral tradition. They weren't written down, so we kind of have to rely on that folklore. For example, going way back to the time of the Druids were the ones that would organize and create the two sacred bonfires. And they believed in the oral tradition, not the written tradition. In fact, I've been doing a lot of research and writing about the Druids lately. I just finished my script, and I'll be doing a video probably released next week all about the Druids and who they were and why they matter. So if you're a fan of Druidry, definitely keep an eye out for that video. I've been working real hard on that one. But yeah, that is what I wanted to go over today for Beltane. So we talked a bit about what Beltane is, where it comes from. We went over 7 different historical ways to celebrate Beltane, and then we went over the kind of May Queen tradition, where that comes from and how it has evolved. So we do have a few more minutes left. If you do have any questions, now is the time. And if you are able, now is definitely the time to either support the show through Patreon or by doing a super chat. So I can keep on doing these pagan happy hours for you all. So let me check your comments. Let me have another sip of my beer. And yeah, let's get to it. Okay. So let's see. I see Michelle here is mentioning the idea of pulling Samhain elements into the Beltane altar. Yes, definitely. I totally feel that there is this connection between Samhain and Beltane. They are the times when the veil between the worlds was at its thinnest, because for the Celtic pagans, this is the transition between the 2 seasons. So not the 4 seasons, but the 2 seasons of summer and winter. So let's see. I see people mentioning the OBOD, the Order of Bards, Oviates, and Druids. They are a popular modern Druid organization that I recommend looking into. Let's see, at least if that's something you're into. Let's see. Just checking your comments here. Krishna has a comment about the solar deities and if they are associated with the holiday. Yes, I believe they are, for the Irish pagans specifically, that they would be honoring these solar deities at this time. Question. Let me see here. I see a question here from Sarah asking any tips for something easy to do, as it's finals week for me, so I'm busy. Yeah, sure. You don't have to do something elaborate. Maybe use this as an excuse to buy yourself a bouquet of yellow flowers and decorate your space with them. That would be a really easy way to celebrate Beltane, or making a simple meal with whatever's in season where you live. Or leaving a simple offering of milk and honey, maybe on a saucer for the Fae. Those would be just some really simple, easy ways to celebrate. Let's see. Great questions, guys. So I think I am about done with my beer, so I should probably sign off soon, considering this is a 9%. So I probably shouldn't keep talking too much longer. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did find this content valuable, please subscribe if you're not subscribed quite yet. I will be checking the comments, so feel free to leave a comment. I'll check that later, and hopefully I'll be able to respond to your specific questions as well. Oh, I see we do have a super chat here from Jody. Thank you so much. Who states, recently found your channel and I'm loving these pagan happy hours. My coven hasn't gotten together since the pandemic started, and I've felt so spiritually deprived. Yes, that's been really hard. Not, for me too. I recently moved to Texas. I don't know any pagans here, and I feel like I'm not alone, that this has been a really tough year for many of us where we haven't been able to connect with fellow pagans. So, I hope these videos at least give you a little bit of that connection. If I've done that, then I'm successful, because I really want to remind you all that we're a community here, even if we're separated by space and time zones. The pagan community is something I really do care about and want to see grow and thrive. So thank you all so much for spending your Friday afternoon with me. I see a great question here in the super chats from Ariel. Thank you so much. Asking, how do you personally celebrate Beltane? Have you noticed the way you celebrate evolving over time? I've definitely noticed that for me as I learn more. Definitely, it's evolved quite a bit over time. As I've mentioned, I am a big fan of cooking, so I always do a big Beltane feast. So I will be making lamb this year with some seasonal vegetables. I will be probably not doing the caudal, but I will be making some Beltane bannock tomorrow morning and leaving that as an offering for the Fae. And I do have some daffodils. I couldn't find any of the traditional Beltane flowers at my local Trader Joe's, but I got some daffodils that I out there in my kitchen area. So I'm going to be decorating the threshold and some of my windows with yellow flowers. I don't know if I'm going to wake up early enough to collect the Beltane dew, but if I do, I'll let you know. So yeah, that's what I'm personally planning on doing, but how I celebrate has, of course, evolved quite considerably over the years. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. You guys had such wonderful comments and questions. I want to wish you all a wonderful Beltane and a great Pergas as well. And I will see you all next week. Happy Beltane, everyone. Bye.